Yeah. If you just. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين بارئ الخلائق الأجمعين باعث الأنبياء والمرسلين ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا حبيبنا حبيب قلوبنا وشفيع نفوسنا أبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. أما بعد فقد قال الله في كتابه المبين. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. فطرة الله التي فطر الناس عليها لا تبديل لخلق الله ذلك الدين القيم ولكن أكثر الناس لا يعلمون. صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Brothers and sisters, continuing on from yesterday's discussion, inshallah, we had spoken in depth to quite some degree about what modernity actually entails, correct? We spoke about the modern man and we spoke about modernity and we spoke about it might not actually be as positive an effect that we may think it is. We spoke about how modernity has now become a synonym for something positive, right? If something is modern, something is good. If something is traditional, it's long gone. However, when we as Muslims, as Shia Muslims, try to understand our identity in the 21st century, we now need to liaise whether modernity is a theorem for us or whether we need to retreat back to traditionalism, or maybe there is some sort of path between the two. So we spoke about what the different levels of modernity was. If I was to ask you to define modernity, I would ask you to define it in 5 major categories, correct? We spoke about this. Category number 1, rationalism. Category number 2, individualism. Category number 3, industrialization. Category number 4, secularization. And the final category is globalization. So we'll go through them one by one. Yesterday we completed the first one, and yesterday we completed rationalism. So inshallah, today we are going to start traversing upon our definitions of what modernity is, and then we are going to conclude on the impact of technology upon the Shia Muslim identity today. Because as I said, whenever we talk about technological advances, it's always something brilliant. Whenever we talk about technological advances, we say, wow, humanity has gone so far. However, have we gone far in the total sense, or have we only gone far in the juz'i sense? Inshallah, we will conclude our discussion on that note. So individualism, when we speak about this is another hallmark feature of modernity, is it not? When you speak about the modern world and when you speak about modernity, we say that individualism is one of them. This is in contrast to what, brothers and sisters? This is in contrast to collectivism. So we either have individualism, someone striving for themselves, or we have collectivism. We have the entire group together. So the first thing I want to really speak about is that neither extremes are correct, okay? We can't have total individualism and we can't have total collectivism. However, the modern world that we have today is very much geared towards individualism, is it not? It can simply be looked in the architecture. If we look at Roman architecture, even the kings and the princes, where did they used to sleep? They used to sleep in halls that were umumi, correct? Everyone was together sleeping on the floor. How can we see the architecture today? Everyone has their own room, everyone has their own place, everyone has their own things. There's this striving for individualism. So there are certain, as with everything, pros and cons with individualism, correct? I'm not entirely going to go out and debase individualism in its entirety. However, what it does give you is an independence, correct? As an individual, you gain this independence and you say that I am independent. But again, I want to challenge the same notion, brothers and sisters. When we say we are independent, is this a point of strength or is this a point of weakness? Whenever in modern society we speak about independence, it's always flaunted as an act of strength, correct? My son is independent, my daughter is independent, my ex is independent, and my wife is independent. We are proclaiming that independence is the highest degree of emotional maturity. However, a short dabble into psychology will show this is far from the case. There are 3 stages of maturity if we come to understand. The first is dependence. When you're born and you're a child, you're utterly dependent, correct? Food, water, clothing. You are utterly dependent upon your parents. When you grow up, you become independent. You don't need them to that degree anymore. However, is that where the tale stops? Absolutely not. We have the third and the final layer, and which is the one of most importance, which is interdependence, brothers and sisters. We negate this in modern society. It's not that I'm independent and I don't need anyone, absolutely not. It's that I am independent of my own affairs and I need everyone. The clothes that we are wearing is an act of something else. The building we are sitting in is an act of something else. If, for example, we look at every aspect of our lives, we would be arrogant to say that we are truly independent. We would be arrogant to say that we are the masters of everything that we have and we are the masters of everything that we do. This is a childish notion, correct? And true understanding of psychology will tell you interdependence is the true reality. However, what is modernism preaching us, brothers and sisters? Independence, correct? Teaching the children as well. Independence, independence, independence. This is very dangerous to Islamic thought. And this is very dangerous to Shia thought. I'm not saying independence is something that is bad, but I'm saying isolated independence is something that's very problematic, correct? Because what does it lead to? I don't need to get married, I'm independent. I don't need my parents, I'm independent. I don't need a husband, I'm independent. I don't need a wife, I'm independent. This is not how it works, correct? If we're so shallow that we don't understand the interdependence of the universe around us, we are going to cocoon ourselves within inside a shell of individualism and we will never come out of it. So upon that, we also have a huge advantage of individualism, which is it drives competition, does it not? When everyone is out for themselves, this drives competition to a degree that we have never seen before. For example, when we see the innovations in Silicon Valley, when we see the innovations in the West, in the East, and wherever it may be, it's difficult not to be impressed when you look at the innovation in technology and developments in these areas, and we can credit this to individualism because everyone wants to be on the top. Everyone wants to be the first to come out with a theory. Everyone wants to be the person who did it. So this is one thing I must say we must credit individualism to. However, with every pro, there's a con, is there not, brothers and sisters? So we are now flaunting of the advantages of individualism, that most definitely it drives capitalism to a high degree, does it not? It drives ingenuity, it motivates you, it brings forward that energy that we want to actually create something of meaning. And as people suggest, if you didn't have that individual responsibility, you would negate it entirely. However, individualism falls on its own sword. Correct? The second hallmark of modernity. Rationalism, individualism. Individualism falls on its own sword. How? When you are so sought into the individual, brothers and sisters, you become what? You become lonely. I ask you, why in modern day, when we have access to the internet, when we are connected to more people than anyone has ever been in the history of mankind, that we are more lonely than ever before? The more I move to the West, as I mentioned yesterday, the more we come across this case, that people are suffering with crippling loneliness. Crippling loneliness. This is a direct result of individualism. If someone, for example, is just out for themselves and they don't understand the interdependence of our coexistence, then this is going to drive you into loneliness. Then this is going to drive you into depression. It's going to drive you into a place where you do not want to be. The final con, before we look at the Shia Islamic perspective on individualism, is that it brings about a self-centeredness, does it not? When we look at the individual, there's a narcissism that arises almost, that, wait, I'm just out for myself. There's no community. There's no one I'm dependent on. Therefore, there's only me. So that ego now is on fire, one can say, when we are in this realm of individualism. And this is fertile environment for shaitan to really act upon, correct? If you are lonely, if you are depressed, if you are anxious, and now you are egotistical, this is the ingredients for someone to get further away from the path of spirituality. So what's Shia Islam's take on this, brothers and sisters? Our time is coming to an end. What is Shia Islam's take on this? So we believe very heavily in personal responsibility. And I'm not negating that for a second, correct? Personal responsibility is a cornerstone of the religion of Islam. Yawm al-Qiyamah, we are there together or we're there on our own? We're there on our own, brothers and sisters, correct? So if we are there on our own now, I'm not saying individualism needs to be scrapped in its totality. As I said, either extremes are dangerous. Collectivism in its totality is dangerous. Individualism in its totality is dangerous. However, the society that we live in today is more geared towards individualism than it is towards the middle path, which is what we are looking for. And personal responsibility, as I mentioned, is something that's important. However, what we need to understand in the ayah of the Quran, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Inna hadhihi ummatukum ummatan wahida. When we speak about the ummah, tell me, does this or does this not fly in the face of individualism? Yes? When we talk about individualism and we talk about the ummah, these are mutually exclusive concepts. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this ayah of the Quran, where He's saying that the ummah is the purest manifestation of Tawheed, according to many mufassirin, this is flying in the face of individualism, correct? When we say that, we must be out for ourselves, we must strive for ourselves, we must be totally independent, we don't need anyone else. We need to have the humility, brothers and sisters, to understand that we ourselves are nothing and we are interdependent on everyone. And Shia Islam is proclaiming this exact point when it's emphasizing upon Tawheed. So when we talk about religion's war upon modernity, or more relevantly, modernity's war upon religion, I would say this is a very important point. When we speak about independence and individualism, we say that in Islam, the communal bonds, bearing in mind the personal responsibility, the communal bonds are focused upon. The communal bonds are very important. And the communal bonds, the ummah, are supposed to be the central part of your lives, not so much a secondary thought and a secondary argument. And concluding individualism, we say that what does this ultimately lead to, right? The Shia perspective. What does it ultimately lead to? When we say that we are an ummah, when we say that we are a collective, when we say that we are interdependent, this leads to tawakkul, does it not? Why do we see a lack of tawakkul going on these days, brothers and sisters? It's because we are steeped in individualism. We think that we are in control of everything. We have the arrogance to say that we can control outcomes. We think that if we do something, we know the outcome. What true tawakkul is what? Whatever happens, alhamdulillah. In every situation, alhamdulillah. Doesn't matter what happens, alhamdulillah. And this is against the tenets of individualism, is it not? So when we see a weakness in our tawakkul, we need to take another deep dive into ourselves and have a look. To what degree are we playing in the realms of modernity and individualism? And to what degree are we striving away from the ummah that Rasulullah and the Ahlul Bayt have actually prescribed for us? Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Two hallmarks done of modernity, brothers and sisters. Inshallah, we move on to the third one. The next three are quite succinct. They're not as detailed as the previous two. When we look at rationalization and when we look at individualism, they define modernity best. The other three, they define it quite well, but they are not as detailed. So number three, and the third feature that characterizes modernity, is industrialization. Correct? What do we say is different in the modern world that wasn't there in the traditional world? We would say it's industrialization. So when we talk about industrialization, we are saying that there has been a shift from agriculture to manufacturing, correct? When you see that shift from agriculture to manufacturing, you can say this is the period of where modernity arises. So individuals would say this is something that's remarkable, correct? We have moved into industrialization. We have more, yes? That's the main thing, we have more. If we look at Adam Smith, if we look at the breakdown of labor, if we look at all of the arguments of actual production, we say we have more, therefore more equals better. Who said this? Who said more equals better? This is a large assumption that we're making upon ourselves, correct? We automatically assume we have manufacturing now and is producing at a blind rate things that we have never seen before. You go to a shop to buy, I don't know, a ring, and you have seen more varieties than all of the kings of prehistoric Arabia, correct? There is so much variety now. All of this is due to industrialization. All of this is due to us having a lot of choice. Now, is this necessarily a good thing, brothers and sisters, is what I'm asking. Just because we have shifted from agriculture to manufacturing, is this necessarily something that's going to get us closer to God? Or is this going to make us feel outside of our natural habitat? That we're not understanding why we're not getting closer to God because we're playing in an era called modernity. So, there are undisputed cultural shifts because of industrialization, correct? People automatically move to cities. When you have industrialization, people move away from the farms and into the cities. And if you look at this from a social perspective, this is extremely problematic. If you read The Human Zoo by an author called Desmond Morris, he talks about the difficulties of humans living in cities and how rates of, we would say, things that are very obscene increase at a correlation rate with people moving into the city. We are not supposed to be living in places of high concentration, correct? If you look at the history of humanity, it's always been tribes, it's always been groups, and it's never been that large. However, when we look at industrialization and the move from villages to cities, everyone has crammed into one certain place in a paradigm which Desmond Morris calls the human zoo. Why does he call it the human zoo? He says the same way the animal in the zoo, they have food, they have water, they have their needs met, but they're not flourishing, correct? They're outside of their natural environment. So he said a city is for a human what a zoo is for an animal. It's a very good read, inshallah. I do highly recommend it. So the Shia perspective now on the third hallmark of modernity, which is industrialization, is what? What does Shia Islam have to say about industrialization? We will have a whole lecture on this. However, just to cover it briefly, what is the perspective of Islam? Because we get a very bad rep, do we not, brothers and sisters? Backward religion, you don't want to progress, there is no progression. However, what do we mean by progression, brothers and sisters? When we talk about industrialization, it's synonymous with good, correct? After industrialization, then everything became farawan, everything became abundant. However, this abundance, is it really spelling the recipe for our disaster, or is it something that's very beneficial for us? In Islam, when we look at the Shia perspective upon industrialization, we see that advancements, technological advancements, are supposed to benefit the entire community, not just one specific substrata, correct? So when we move upon our discussion of actual industrialization and the impact of technology upon the modern society, then we see that it's got nothing to do with it. And we see that it's not so much that everyone is becoming more equal, correct? That poverty is now being alleviated. We see the gaps between rich and poor becoming wider and wider, yes or no? So if the gaps between rich and poor are becoming wider and wider, I ask you, what's the point of technology here? It was supposed to equalize everyone. It was supposed to make everyone's life better. So we'll speak about this in detail, but in regards to industrialization, this is the Shia Islamic perspective. We move on to secularization, the fourth hallmark for modernity. Secularization, there's not much to say about it, apart from the fact that the decline of the religious influence in public life is epitomized by secularization. In the community that we live in, is religious life not put on the side, and is our normal quote-unquote life not put on the side? Religion is not part of the everyday life. Religion is not part of your normal day-to-day, correct? In your normal day-to-day, when a religion is not part of it, we call this secularization. And this is another quintessential aspect of the modern world. For example, most people would not even know at work if you're Muslim, correct? Most people would have no idea what you do. However, when we look at the Islamic Shi'i perspective on secularization, religion is a part of life and life is a part of religion. Us as Westerners, I have a couple minutes left with you. We tend to compartmentalize things, correct? We compartmentalize religion. We compartmentalize our work. We compartmentalize our family. We compartmentalize everything. However, this is very problematic because Tawheed, is that compartmentalized? Absolutely not. Tawheed is holistic. Tawheed is interconnected. Religion is part of your family, which is part of your work, which is part of your social structure. It's all interconnected with each other. However, what have we done as Westerners? We have compartmentalized everything. So this secularization now becomes very problematic in us to actually allow God to exist in every aspect of our life, instead of compartmentalizing it to the times of the 5 salah, saying that we've done our 5 salah and now it's time to go. When we look at, for example, the sayings of Rajab Ali Khayyat, he was a famous Iranian mystic. He says, he was obviously a tailor. He said, there is not a single needle that I put in a thread without thinking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A single needle in a thread without thinking of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, every time I'm stitching clothes, every hole that I'm making, I am thinking of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the opposite of secularization, correct? He has made religion the entirety of his life, and now there is that aspect of fulfillment, there is that aspect of satisfaction. So secularization leads to greater tolerance, correct? We live in a tolerant society. However, it makes the role of religion very ambiguous. Which one is right now? One religion is saying one thing and another religion is saying another thing. So moral standards become subjective in secularization, correct? As we stated, now everyone's tolerant. If everyone's tolerant and moral standards become objective, what's the issue here from a Shia Islamic perspective, brothers and sisters? What's the issue? Why can't we have a subjective set of morals? Why can't he believe one thing and I believe another thing? What's wrong with this? Why can't she believe one thing and she believes another thing? What's wrong with this? When Rasulullah came down with a singular message, what did he say he came down to perfect? Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala. He said, I came down to perfect what? Akhlaq. Akhlaq we are translating as morality here. So if he is saying, I've come here to perfect your akhlaq, does that give a subjectivity to akhlaq? Or does that give an objectivity to akhlaq? Objectivity. So now secularization has been thrown out of the window. We are saying that akhlaq and morals are objective. Right is right and wrong is wrong. Husn qubh, as they say. Correct? There is an objective right and there is an objective wrong. However, if we look at this fourth tenet of modernity, which is secularization, we see that we are unable to actually flourish in this physically and metaphysically because moral standards now become subjective. We conclude on the final point, which is the final hallmark of globalization. I wanted to start upon the impact of technology upon society and the Shia Muslim identity today, but inshallah with tawfiq, tomorrow. The final point, which then concludes our definition of modernity so that we can actually now begin our discussion as of tomorrow, is globalization. That is the final feature of modernity. That is the final feature of the modern man. When we say that we are modern and we say that we are pishrafte, when we say that we are advanced, these are the 5 characteristic traits that we are talking about. So globalization is a very simple argument where we see that nations and cultures become more interconnected. So would we say that this is a good thing or a bad thing, brothers and sisters, globalization? Would we say this is something positive or negative? We largely say this is something positive, correct? So wait, it's an aspect of modernity, but you're saying that it's positive. So what's our issue here? Our issue here is in this instance, we are all for globalization. We are all for the unified ummah. We are all for everything becoming very egalitarian. However, what are we not for? Morals, standards, and ethics homogenizing. When you have a globalized society, what do you have? You have homogeneous rules, you have homogeneous ethics, you have homogeneous rule sets, which, if they are not driven from an Islamic perspective, if they are not driven from an Islamic ethos, then when we see this homogenization of rules, we see the relaxation of the participating of Islam. So now in these days, yes, we see a lot of individuals, subhanAllah, what do they call themselves? Modern Muslims. Great, huh? Modern Muslims. When we speak about modern Muslims, what exactly are you saying here? Am I an extreme Muslim now? Is that what you're trying to allude to? When we speak about a modern Muslim, we're speaking about nothing more than an individual who has now homogenized their value set in order for us to live in modern society. But as we understand, Islam is not combating modern society. Islam lives comfortably within it. But all we need to do is find our place in it, inshallah, tomorrow. With the tawfiq of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we will start from the beginning our discussion of the impact of technology upon the Shia Muslim identity, how that has affected modernity, and what we as Muslims need to do in order to mitigate the discrepancies and the difficulties and actually accelerate the things that are going well. Wa akhir da'wana walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali tahirin.